have a question. How many people here own Bitcoin? Okay, I see a few. How many people know how it works? Well, hopefully I'll increase that number today. But I'm going to start with something simple, splitting a cookie between two people. I bet a lot of you have split a cookie by having one person cut and the other person pick. This method is special because it's always fair, even if each person acts purely in their own interests. If Alice doesn't care about Bob at all, she just wants the biggest piece of the cookie, she'll still have to cut it down the middle, since otherwise, Bob would leave her with a smaller piece. We call this a trustless system, since neither person has to trust the intentions of the other one, and yet both will still consider the outcome fair. This same idea is the foundation of Bitcoin. It's what makes it unique. You may have heard that Bitcoin is a digital currency. That's true, but that's not really what makes it special. At its heart, Bitcoin is like our method of splitting a cookie. It has a set of rules that work even if everyone acts purely in their own interests. After all, being a digital currency isn't particularly new or unique. These days, actual coins and bills are rare. More than 90% of all money today exists only on computer services. So in a way, the Canadian dollar is mostly a digital currency, but it is not trustless. We have to trust our banks to keep our money secure. We have to trust Visa and others every time we swipe our credit card. And we have to trust the government not to print too much new money and sap away the values of our dollars through inflation. This is significant because even if you do trust all these institutions, they still add a cost to all our transactions. You might be wondering what I mean by a digital currency. How can money exist only on a computer? It seems hard to imagine because there are no tangible coins or bills. But the basic idea is simple. It's just a table of numbers in a computer file, like a big Excel spreadsheet. This table, which is called a ledger, records the amount of money that everyone has and all the transactions that they make. It doesn't matter whether I swipe a Visa card or transfer Bitcoin. In both cases, a computer somewhere updates its ledger table. My total balance goes down, and the recipient's goes up. The ledgers for regular currencies, like the Canadian dollar, are kept by banks. We must trust these banks to update the ledgers accurately and honestly. But let's imagine for a second that we are Bitcoin's mysterious creator, Satoshi Nakamoto, and we want to invent a trustless currency. The first thing we'd realize is that we can't let a single party control the ledger, like a bank, since that necessarily requires it to be trusted. Instead, everyone must have a copy of the ledger, and all must have some say in how it is updated. That is what it means when people say Bitcoin is decentralized. It also makes it more secure, because it's not susceptible to a single hack or data loss. But decentralizing the ledger introduces new problems. For one, how do we keep everybody's copy of the ledger in sync? If I buy 2 pizzas for 10,000 Bitcoin, that transaction has to be recorded on everyone's copy of the ledger. Furthermore, there is a potential for conflict. If I am dishonest, and remember, we can't trust anybody, I might wait until I have my pizza and then change my ledger to erase the Bitcoin payment. So our system needs a way of determining whose version of the ledger is correct, if 2 copies happen to differ. Bitcoin's ingenious solution to these problems is basically a type of voting, in which everyone votes for the copy of the ledger they believe to be correct. But it has a clever twist. We can't just give everyone a single ballot to cast, because it's easy to create multiple identities on the internet and hard to verify the unique people behind them. Instead, Bitcoin requires computers to spend time doing work in order to submit a vote. I'll talk more about what this work is in a second, but what's important now is that it requires computer hardware, time, and electricity, each with real-world costs. And so it's enormously unlikely that anyone can submit enough votes to overwhelm the rest of the community. So why do voters pay these real-world costs? Well, because they receive new Bitcoin for doing so. This process of doing work to a vote and receiving Bitcoin in return is called mining. Just as real-world mining is the only source of new gold, this process is the only way that new Bitcoins are created. And like real gold, the returns from mining diminish with time and will eventually run out, capping the total amount of Bitcoin that will ever exist to about 21 million. So Bitcoin won't lose value to inflation in the long run. That's true for gold too, but unlike gold, Bitcoin is easy to buy, sell, store, and transfer in a trustless way between people and across borders. Okay, so mining is a system used to keep everybody's copy of the ledger honest and in sync. But what exactly is this mining? How does it work? The answer centers on another word you may have heard, the blockchain. The blockchain is Bitcoin's ledger. Remember that a ledger records transactions. In the case of Bitcoin, transactions happen all the time, all around the world. Every 10 minutes, Bitcoin miners group all new transactions together into a block and then chain it to all the previous blocks. That is the ultimate purpose of mining in Bitcoin, to build its ledger, the blockchain, out of these 10-minute blocks. But here's the catch. Adding a new block to the chain isn't easy. It requires lots of work from all the miners. This work is a lot like real-world gold mining in the 1800s. Back then, prospectors would filter a stream bed through a sieve or pan. If they were lucky, there would be gold left after the water and gravel drained out. But most times there'd be nothing, and they'd have to try again. Bitcoin miners use computers instead of shovels and pans. Instead of a pail of sand, they start with a block of new Bitcoin transactions, which they want to add to the blockchain. And instead of a sieve, they run this block through a special computer program called a hash, which takes the block's bytes, scrambles them up, and turns them into a big number. This number acts kind of like a fingerprint for the block, in that it is unique to its contents. If we change anything in the block, it will have a new fingerprint number. The equivalent to a gold miner finding gold in his pan is a Bitcoin miner finding a fingerprint number that starts with 20 zeros. That is because a key rule in Bitcoin is that a block can only be added to the blockchain if its fingerprint's first 20 digits are all zero. Blocks with these special fingerprints are extremely rare, and so a miner needs to create many versions of a new block before he finds one that can be added to the blockchain. Miners do this by adding an arbitrary number to the end of a block. This number has no real-world significance. It's not a part of any transaction, but it does change the fingerprint. So miners guess at it over and over again until a lucky one eventually finds a value that changes the fingerprint to start with 20 zeros. This discovery is then shared across the Bitcoin network, and everyone can add the now valid version of the block to their copy of the blockchain. As for the lucky miner, she hits pay dirt, receiving around $160,000 worth of newly minted Bitcoin. This lucrative reward has driven a modern-day gold rush in Bitcoin mining, since anyone can be a miner. All you need is a powerful enough computer. And its scale is staggering. The chances of any guess finding a valid fingerprint are about the same as finding one specific grain of sand in all the world's oceans. That sounds absolutely impossible, but there are many millions of mining computers all over the world, and each one does many trillions of guesses a second. Amazingly, all this collective effort results in a valid block being found once every 10 minutes. These computers do use a substantial amount of electricity, about the same as the entire province of Manitoba. Remember that the point of all this work and electricity is to keep everybody's copy of the ledger honest and in sync. To summarize how, imagine that I try to dine and dash on a lunch I paid for in Bitcoin. By the time I finish eating, my payment transaction will be recorded in everyone's copy of the blockchain. My plan is to erase it from my copy and then convince everyone else that mine is the correct version. The problem is that by changing a block, I'll also change its fingerprint. That breaks my blockchain. For other people to take it seriously, I'll have to remine a new fingerprint, one that starts with 20 zeros, but this time all by myself. That's almost unthinkable. But the real clincher is that the blockchain links blocks together such that each block depends on the previous one. So it's not just one block I'll have to remine. It's all the ones that came after as well. So the blockchain is the clever idea that Satoshi Nakamoto realized could be used to prevent people from going back and editing Bitcoin's ledger. Once a transaction is in the blockchain, it's written in stone. But since then, people have realized that this can be used for other purposes as well. To see why, realize that the contents of a block don't have to be Bitcoin transactions in order for the blockchain to work. Our fingerprint program just scrambles bytes. It doesn't care what those bytes represent. As an example, imagine that you come up with a new idea. You don't want to spend time and money patenting it, but you also don't want someone else to come along, patent the same idea, and sue you. One old-fashioned solution is to type up the idea into a letter and mail it to yourself. If you ever get called into patent court, you can take this copy of the letter, still sealed and dated by the Canada Post Office, and hopefully convince the judge that you came up with the idea when you did. But these days, a more foolproof strategy is to use the blockchain. The idea here is to include the letter in a block in place of a regular Bitcoin transaction. The same reasoning applies. Just as you can't go back and edit an old Bitcoin transaction, you can't go back and retroactively add a letter to an old block. Its inclusion in the blockchain truly proves that you came up with the idea when you did. There are many such applications, and the interested players are major ones. IBM, Walmart, TD Bank, and more are investing significant resources into applications that range from supply chains to escrow services. The diamond giant De Beers is launching an industry-wide blockchain this year to track diamonds. This is important because after being mined, diamonds may change hands many times. A conscientious consumer might not trust all these middlemen, but using the blockchain, he can still be sure that he's not buying a conflict or blood diamond. Blockchain technology also has the potential to revolutionize political voting, which has been in the spotlight since the 2016 US election. Currently, when we cast a vote, we put a ballot into a box and never see it again. We have to trust that it gets counted and that the system is secure against hacks. Both these problems could be solved by recording votes on a public blockchain. Doing so would make them immune to future tampering and allow us to independently verify their counts. Similarly, the blockchain may help provide more transparency to charitable donations. One day, we may be able to use it to see exactly how our money is spent, which can only help increase charities' efficiency and honesty. And it's already more than 90% cheaper to send money to places like Africa using Bitcoin as compared to traditional methods. These are real applications, but with Bitcoin's dizzying price increase in the past year, there has been irrational hype around both it and the blockchain. The best example is the Long Island Iced Tea Company. This past December, it simply renamed itself the Long Blockchain Company, and its stock immediately tripled. To cut through this hype, it's important to remember what the blockchain really is: a useful tool to record information when the participants don't necessarily trust each other. And that's what I hope you take away from this talk today. There are few subjects that generate as much hype and as much vitriol as Bitcoin and the blockchain. But with some idea how it works, I hope you'll see that it truly is a technological advancement that solves real problems. And who knows? Bitcoin is already as trustless as splitting a cookie like Alice and Bob. Maybe one day, it'll be just as widespread. Thank you.